don't just hope your writing will do its job. Instead, start with the end in mind. Well, it's that time of year where I'm realizing that I didn't start planning my fall classes early enough in the summer, so I've spent the week buried in syllabi and designing assignments, and honestly, I've still got a ways to go if I'm going to be ready in time. But I've also been thinking about how there are some useful things to learn from this process. And the first is that the only difference between professors and students is that professors have been in school longer. You shouldn't be writing a paper the day before it's due, and I shouldn't be writing a syllabus the day before the semester starts, but here we are doing exactly that. And I can also confirm that the back row is the first to fill up during faculty meetings, and that most professors spend those meetings on their phones. And of course, I don't say that to discredit anyone, just to remind you and me that we're all still human. More importantly, though, I've also been thinking about how an important principle for designing an effective class could also help you to write a more effective paper or story or whatever it is that you have to write. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about it and also try to keep it pretty short, because the fact is I do still have a good chunk of work to do, but that will just be between you and me. Nobody else has to know. Anyhow, I'm talking about the process of backward design, which has become pretty common, if not standard practice in education, and I think it could make a good difference for your writing. So let's hurry up and talk about it before anyone notices that I'm gone. When I first learned about backward design, it was presented in contrast to other, less deliberate methods for designing a class. The first is the brainless and hopeless practice of saying that the semester has 15 weeks and the textbook has 15 chapters, so we'll just do a chapter a week. All done. And the second is a variation on that theme, the practice of saying, well, there must be about 45 different class periods this semester, so I need to come up with a list of 45 different topics that we could cover before the end. The problem with both of these strategies is that they don't really serve a purpose. Really, they're just designed to fill time. Maybe something like the student who just comes up with as many things to say as possible in order to meet a required page count. So just going through one chapter of the textbook a week or covering a different topic in every class will ensure that you have something to talk about every day, but it doesn't guarantee that the students will be doing anything productive or purposeful. The concept of backward design, then, says that you should begin with a specific goal or outcome in mind. So, in my case, I'm teaching a class that has outcomes related to research, writing processes, and argumentation, and that can be best demonstrated by a student's ability to write a persuasive argument that's supported by research. That's my endpoint. I'll know that my students have accomplished what they need to accomplish if they can write that kind of paper by the end of the semester. So with that in mind, I just need to figure out what my students need to be able to do first in order to be able to write that persuasive argument. And this idea of working backwards pairs up nicely with the idea of scaffolding, which says that each assignment should build on the one that came before it, because it helps me to develop a sequence of assignments that all work as stepping stones to get my students from where they begin to where I need them to end up. So what does someone need to know before they can turn in a polished and persuasive argument? Well, they probably need to start with a draft. And what would help them to write that draft? It would probably be good for them to have a solid plan or even an outline for that argument. Before they can do that, though, they'll probably need to spend some time thinking about the argument they want to make and the audience that they want to persuade before they can even consider putting together an outline. Of course, before they do that, they'll probably have to do some research about the problem they're trying to solve so that they'll have a good understanding of what's going on and a reasonable knowledge of what could be done to address the issue. So now I'm not just saying, what are some things that I could talk about during the semester? Instead, I'm saying, if a person in my class is going to write a strong argument by the end, somewhere near the beginning, they're going to have to write a research paper. And just like that, the first major assignment of the semester is a research report, where the task is to learn about a problem, understand the previous attempts at a solution, and develop a good sense of what could still be done. And then it's possible to work backwards from there on an even smaller scale. So in order to write that research report, we'll probably need to spend some time in class talking about quoting and citing sources, finding reliable information, developing research questions, and so on. Instead of starting on day one and just trying to find useful things to say until the end, with backward design, we start on the last day and then work backwards, placing those purposeful steps that will carry somebody from the first day to the end. Now, we've talked about similar ideas before when it comes to staring down a blank page, so what we talk about now might sound kind of familiar, but different things resonate with different people in different ways, so it's worth coming at it from a new angle. But anyway, what if you aren't designing a writing class? What if you're just writing your novel? Well, then instead of asking yourself what kinds of skills you want your students to develop by the end of the semester, you can ask yourself what kinds of experiences you want your readers to have had by the end of your novel. And it's probable that it might be something like hoping that your reader will experience the sense of relief or accomplishment and triumph that comes with seeing the protagonist overcome a difficult challenge. And that sounds great. You could just start by writing Once Upon a Time and seeing where things go, and then hoping that you arrive at some meaningful conclusion. Or you could start at the end and work backwards step by step. So what needs to happen for your hero to arrive at that triumphant conclusion? Well, they're going to have to overcome a difficult challenge, like defeating a powerful villain. And how will your reader believe that the villain is actually powerful, that they're a worthy and credible challenge to the protagonist? Well, maybe earlier in the story, you could show them defeating the hero, maybe by exploiting some kind of weakness that raises the stakes for the eventual final encounter. That sounds cool, but how can we make sure that the villain's ability to exploit that weakness actually matters? Well, perhaps we could show the protagonist besting other credible threats even earlier in the story. And that becomes more meaningful when we see the hero spend time training to develop their skills or powers or whatever it is that makes them great. And of course, that takes us to the very beginning, where the hero isn't that strong at all and only aspires to make a difference. Now we have a story about a character who wants to become a hero and trains every day for that purpose. When the first threat emerges, we get to see that training pay off. And it looks like our hero is strong and admirable. But when the true villain emerges, our hero just isn't good enough, and it turns out they have a critical weakness that the villain can continue to exploit as long as they want. That leads us then to experience the true relief and satisfaction that comes from seeing the hero overcome that villain in the end despite their limitations. Could you write a story like that by just starting on page 1 and going from there? Of course you could, but we managed to develop a story like that in just a few minutes, and we did it without having to write pages and pages of exploratory thinking that we might end up having to cut because it was really just us spinning our wheels. And obviously this isn't the most inventive plot, but it does show how backward design can help you to develop the major beats of your story before you even start writing sentences. So this is a process really, not of starting at the beginning and asking yourself what could happen next, but of starting at the end and asking what has to happen first. It's a really effective way of making sure that every part of a class is contributing to its educational purpose, but it can also be a good way to make sure that every part of a story is contributing to its climax and resolution. And of course, it's not just good for fiction. If you're going to persuade somebody to vote for a tax increase, what things are you going to need to persuade them of first? Or if you're writing a poem, trying to get somebody to experience the joy of eating a fig right off the tree, what kinds of experiences are they going to need first in order to really feel that feeling? With backward design, you don't get started and then hope that things will work out. Instead, you lock on to your destination and then figure out what needs to happen immediately before that. Then, backward step by backward step, you develop a plan that will guarantee that you and your readers end up where you need to be. I don't really spend much time solving mazes these days, but I do remember spending a lot of time running my pencil through labyrinths as a kid. Sometimes it could be really challenging to find a path from the beginning to the end, but then I got the tip that it was much easier to solve a maze if you started at the exit and worked your way back to the entrance. Is that technically cheating? Well, maybe, but it's also true. There are multiple wrong ways to go from the beginning to the end, but there's only one correct path from the end to the beginning. And that's why I think the concept of backward design can be so useful, not just for developing a class, but also for planning your writing. When you begin at the beginning and just start writing, you could end up going anywhere and everywhere, and that might not be somewhere that's very useful. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard established writers say that they wrote their first book or novel or whatever it was, and then take it to a trusted mentor only to have them say that they needed to cut the first half. But when you start at the end and ask what the previous step has to be, the answers are much more limited. Put your character at home on a Saturday morning and see where they go from there, and the answers are virtually limitless. But if you put your character in battle in the villain's lair, and then ask yourself where they have to be before that, there's pretty much only one answer: outside the villain's lair, gathering their courage. Unlike for mazes, backward design in writing isn't cheating. It's a way to make sure that your writing is actually doing its job. Once you have the main path laid out, you could go back and add some detours or red herrings for the delight of your readers, but you'll also be sure that they're only misleading your readers for a little bit, rather than running the risk of having them completely derail you and your project. And speaking of doing jobs, I should probably get back to doing my own, so I'll leave it at that and give you the time to work on some backward design of your own. Just be sure to tell me how it goes. I hope it's as useful for you as it has been for me. As always, thanks a bunch for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you again next week with, I hope, considerably less procrastinatory weight hanging above my head.